Guthrie's getting everything hooked up. That's Guthrie. I'm Susan. Hello, everyone. So I have to say that, I'm sitting and listening to the announcements, and I have everything in my hand, ready to come up, because we want to do this transition as fast as possible. So I'm thinking about, okay, we're about to get on the stage, about to give our talk, and all of a sudden, it's like, whoa, Dave Gray is coming on stage. That was like, whoa, one of my personal heroes. If any of you ever watch any of the videos that we do, I do most of them in my studio. I think I just lost that. Oh, okay, thank you. In my studio, and I'm behind a bookcase, and the camera is, you can see the bookcase. Some people have told me sometimes, actually, it's a little distracting because I should be listening to you, but I don't want to see what books you have on your bookshelf. But if you do look at that, you will see several Dave Gray books on my bookshelf behind me. And I have to say, I don't think a week goes by when I don't tell some client about some technique that's in game storming that they really need to use. So thank you very much, Dave, for that. All right, Guthrie, we ready? You're still working on it. All right. I'm going to start because I don't start with a slide anyway. I would like, by a show of hands, for anyone who remembers the first time that they ever used a tablet device. If you really remember the first time, okay? How about the first time do you really remember the first time you used a smartphone? How about the first time you used a laptop computer? Do you remember that? Yeah. How about the first time you used a desktop computer? At some point pretty soon, if I ask that question, those questions in the room, no one will remember the first time, because we really only create memories after the age of about 3. Anything that happens before 2 or 3, you actually don't remember. And of course, the generations growing up now, they've used all these devices before the age of 2, so they're not going to remember. But I figured that most of you would probably remember a lot of that. And I certainly remember the first time that I ever used a computer. And I'm not going to tell you the exact year, and you may or may not be able to figure out when it was, but I will tell you that I was in grad school, and I went to grad school at Penn State. I have a Ph.D. in psychology from Penn State University. And when I went to school there, they had a language requirement for graduate students. You had to take a language, but they had this weird option where you didn't have to, instead of a foreign language, you could take a computer programming language. Like, why they thought that was anything the same, I don't know. But I said, okay, I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that. So this was actually the first time I ever used a computer or interacted with a computer, was to write a program. So I wrote my program. Now, in those days, you wrote your program by literally writing out the code on a piece of paper with a pen or a pencil, and then Guthrie's looking at me with kind of like, what? And then you gave the computer the instructions. And the way that you gave the computer the instructions was with something that looks like this. And this is called a punch card. You went to a machine and you did a thing that was kind of like typing. And it made little holes and for each line of your code. And then you submitted that to the computer, and you got the program ran. And that was the first time I ever used something we would call a computer. Now, I remember this distinctly because this particular interaction changed the course of my life, which I didn't know that it was going to do that, but it did, because what happened when I ran my first program, very excited, and I handed the cards to the computer scientist. My memory is that this was a guy in a white coat because he was a scientist, but I really think that's a faulty memory. And he put the cards in the computer, and then I had to run over, like really about an hour later, and wait for my printout with the results of my program, which was supposed to add some numbers together or something. And I opened it up, and it said, job aborted. And that was my first interaction ever with a computer. And I was studying psychology, how people learn, how people think, how people work. And I said, probably out loud in that room, well, this is ridiculous. You know, this is how we're going to interact with these things? Like, that doesn't make any sense. I didn't say, that's not usable, that's not user-friendly, that's not good UX, because none of those terms had been invented at that time. But I knew right then that I wanted to work in this field, combining psychology and design together. So that's the first time I ever used a computer. Now, I have to say, punch cards were around long before the first time I used them. Here's a wonderful photo of showing some very nice, probably extremely bored person who's going to feed all of these cards into the computer to make some kind of program run. So I have a quiz question for you. So punch cards in commercial computers. Did that happen before 1960 or after 1960? So everybody who thinks the first time punch cards were used in commercial computers before 1960, raise your hand. And if you think it was after, raise your hand. Are you guys just deciding based on the outfit she was wearing? That's what I'm wondering. Okay, the answer is before. 1952 was the first time in an IBM 701 mainframe computer. But actually, interestingly, the first use of punch cards really goes back to the year 1801. I was fortunate enough to wander in, not even planned, into a textile museum in France one day, a couple years ago. Wonderful museum with looms going back hundreds and hundreds of years. And they showed this particular loom from 1801, and that the material, the fabric that was being created in the loom was being created by cards that were programmed just like my punch cards. And I believe the woman who was giving the tour said it took often 10 years to program that card to get the design. Of course, once it was programmed, they could create that pattern over and over and over again. That's why it was such an amazing invention. So punch cards haven't been around for a while. Now, I know that the name of this talk is the future of human technology interaction. So we're just going to talk about the past a little bit while longer. Guthrie, you want to do the next one? We have, I think, one more quiz question for us.
So we also have VR. I know we said, actually, we were talking to someone earlier who said we don't have any AR, VR in our talk. That's sort of a lie, but just this one thing. So let's talk about who thinks before 2008. How about after? So I don't remember where I found this picture, but it's just one of my favorite pictures. It was definitely before. There was the Sega VR. Nintendo also made one, which was the something
Virtual Boy.
Yeah, there you go. And the graphics are great as well. So when we're talking about the future of technology, what's going to happen, it is interesting to think about how long, even though it feels like things are happening really fast, in some ways they're not. There is this sort of tipping point when all of a sudden it feels like, oh, VR is here, but the idea of virtual reality, that's been around for a long time.
All right, so I promised we would talk about the future. So let's talk about the future. I'm a psychologist. Guthrie has a degree in economics. He specializes in behavioral economics. He also has a law degree. He's a licensed attorney in Illinois, so just watch out. But we both believe that the more that you understand humans and the more that you understand people, then the more you will be ready to predict what's going to happen in the future with technology and to deal with it. So we want to share with you today some of the things that we think are really important about people that have to do with what's coming down the pike in the very near future. So the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that people are social. So we know this about people. We know that we're social animals, that a lot of our interactions are social. People want to have relationships, and they see themselves in others, and they see themselves not just in other people, but they see themselves in other things and other devices. And what's happening now, of course, is that some of our devices, instead of being just a box, like a computer or even a phone, some of these other devices are starting to move, and they're starting to move in ways that seem kind of human-like. They might have legs, they might have arms, they are trying to do something. And we can now start to relate to that, and we very, very quickly put ourselves in the place of these devices. So when we're looking at something like this, we're like, stop torturing the robot. What is with this guy? Of course he's wearing all black. Like, why is he doing this? Like, you know, I mean, come on. Aw, right? It's a machine. You know, why are you saying, oh, do you have that same feeling if someone takes, you know, a laptop and throws it down because it's doing a crash test on the laptop? I mean, we might say, oh, that doesn't look good, but we're not, aw, right? But we feel that way because we do something called anthropomorphizing. So that anthropomorphizing means that we give objects that are not human the qualities of a human, and we react to them as though they were a person. And this isn't a bad thing. And in fact, we know that when you do that, that's when you start to trust the thing more. So there's been some interesting research about driverless cars that shows that when the driverless car is talking to you, and you give that voice a name, so it's not just the car, but you call it, you know, Siri or Ruth or Alexa or whatever kinds of names we give to our devices, then people trust the information that the vehicle is giving them more. It raises the level of trust that the people in the car have to the decisions that the car is making if that voice has a name. So that anthropomorphization increases trust. Next thing I want to talk about is the interesting interactions we have with something that you might call a social robot. So yeah, nope. There we go. All right, I'm going to talk while teacher. We tested this during break, and we had sound.
We got sound.
What's that?
Okay. So this is a little robot that went around at a festival.
My name is Jane.
Tell
Talking
me
to people.
something that you've never told a stranger before.
How much I love my wife. I love cardboard.
Okay, sometimes when I run out of toilet paper and I don't have time to go to the store, I just steal some from a public bathroom.
I have a blue birthmark on my butt.
I basically never wear clothes when I'm in my apartment by myself.
I would love to be able to play the bagpipes or the piano.
My daughter's pregnant.
I'm scared I won't be able to love and to let myself go in a love relationship.
If you could go back and tell yourself something as a child, what would it be?
You are really awesome.
You are loved very, very much.
To go out of my way more often to be nice.
Be yourself.
Do you think humans and robots can be friends?
I like you. I think we're friends. Absolutely. I think robots and humans. Great future together.
I'm very cynical. I'd be very scared.
I think humans and robots can be friends. Actually, not. I think there's a fundamental difference between human consciousness and robotic intelligence.
We're friends, right? Yeah, I do. I think we're I think this is the start of a beautiful friendship.
So that's a little little device. It's called Blab Droid, and it looks like that. And they send it around at festivals, and it talks. You heard the voice. They found that when they programmed it in a voice that sounded like maybe an 8-year-old boy, that got more interaction from people than if it sounded like an adult. And they also found, interestingly, that it's made out of cardboard. So when it goes around, it actually runs into things and gets dings, like you can see in this picture. It's got little dings and stuff. And the more dinged up it was, the more personal and private thoughts people gave to it. Like, if it didn't look quite perfect, then they talked more, which I thought was kind of interesting too. So, a couple things from this. One is that conversation and voice interaction will be the norm. I mean, it is starting to be the norm now. It is going to be the norm. It will be the way that we interact with our devices. Mark, this morning, giving his talk on storytelling, talked about oxytocin. So oxytocin is a bonding chemical. And we know that when people interact with each other, especially if they interact in a way that involves touch or hugging, that they release oxytocin. And we also know that you can, if you just pet anything that's soft and fuzzy, like these are social robots. These are, stuffed animals, but they move and they're soft, and people pet them. That will also release oxytocin, and this is being used in nursing homes and so on to give people the chance to produce oxytocin and feel like they're bonding. And it turns out you don't even need to have the whole animal. You can have part of the animal. Guthrie says he really wants one of these, and the faster you pet it, the faster the tail wags, apparently. That is something that's common, is social robots. And then we also know that people will use whatever technology is available to have a romantic relationship. And so, of course, what's starting to happen now, will happen more, is that you can kind of create your own boyfriend and girlfriend. There is a guy in Japan who has married his robot girlfriend legally. So this is starting to happen as well. So from this number one thing about social, what should you expect? People are going to have relationships with machines. They will want to have relationships with machines, and they will talk to those machines. And they may love and trust those machines even more, as much or even more than humans. So whether we like this idea or not, it is true. It's just the way people are. They build relationships with their devices, and as these devices start having interacting more like humans, that will only increase.
So, I mean, and this leads me perfectly, it's a really great segue, into our second point. So who here has someone at work who maybe they're a wonderful person, but they're kind of incompetent at a certain task they do?
And it's not the person sitting next to you.
Not the person sitting next to you. Who here has perhaps a friend or a relative that's really flaky, and they say, oh, I'm going to go, but then I got sick, or I can't make it, or whatever. Right? Okay. So, I mean, who here trusts that an Amazon package is going to arrive when it says it will for the vast majority of the time? And the reality is that humans we're really good at some stuff, but consistent responses with repetition is perhaps not one of those things. So when it comes to repetitive tasks, AI and robots, I mean, they're purpose-built for these things. And that's one of the reasons, again, that I think you're going to have trust factors. Because if you have a program that's giving you the same result perfectly every single time, it's a lot easier to trust what that outcome is going to be than perhaps with a human. And you could talk about driverless cars, for example. A lot of variables going on, but there are a lot of variables with human drivers too. If you have a drunk driver, things get very tricky. So when we think about, so far a lot of the talk about robots. A lot of people talked about sort of the smart ancillary robots that are doing the building of cars and that kind of thing. But when we're talking about actually getting stuff done, these are things that purposely built robots are really good at, especially in very complex systems. So this is obviously an Amazon fulfillment center, and they're very cute. They kind of buzz around, they do their little thing, they pick up the stacks and they move the stacks around. And then they put the things in the little boxes, and the boxes go to the right place. It's all automated. And it's in a lot of ways, it's awesome in the dictionary sense of the word, sort of awe-inspiring how much can get done when you automate systems that well. Talk about surgery. There's a lot of evidence that AI is better at identifying certain types of tumors that are seen on scans better than a doctor can identify patterns of possible connected illnesses, and then surgery as well. You can be a lot more precise in very, very tiny spaces with robotic tools than the human hand. Now, I used to work at a company called Echo Logistics after college, and it's at 600 West Chicago. I live in Chicago. And it is an enormous building, this old building from the 1920s. It used to be this huge warehouse. And they had in there, it was a mail order catalog back when those were a thing. Who here has ever ordered something from a catalog that you got in the mail? Okay, cool. See a couple hands have not gone up. We're getting there. Back in the 20s, Sears, that used to be this huge thing. And so the way that instead of the automated distribution center, what they had is they had women on roller skates, and they would skate around, because it was faster, and they would skate around the warehouse and fill the orders. And that was what fulfillment meant in the 1920s in Chicago, was women only on roller skates. So, clearly there are advantages to this. So, when we are talking about doing repetitive tasks a lot and combining it with this sort of social aspect, most jobs, including information jobs, I'm not sure what the limits of AI are going to be, but I think they're pretty high, will be done by AI and machines more efficiently than humans. That doesn't mean that all of your jobs will be replaced, but it means that they potentially could be replaced. So a lot of times it is simply cheaper to continue to have the systems in place that you have, continue to have humans do the work. You can automate almost every part of building an iPhone, but for a very long time, they continued to have human manufacturing just because it was cheaper. So there are, so again, I'm not saying that it doesn't mean all jobs will disappear, but there's a good chance that there will be an incentive to do so if the economics of it change. And this is on that slide. Clippy's coming for your job. Does everyone know who Clippy is? Does anyone not know who Clippy is? See, okay, we do have a couple people. Good. All right, so when we originally had this slide pulled up, we had an argument, and she said, you have to explain.
I said, not everyone's going to know.
And I said, ooh, I think they might. So Clippy was an invention way ahead of its time. It was...
or a disaster way ahead of its time, depending on your point of view.
Microsoft thought what humans wanted was a conversational robot that would help, conversational piece of software that would help people with their tasks. He was friendly, he was clippy, he was a paperclip. There were a bunch of other things you could get. There's a dog and a magician, wizard. It was just this idea that every time you started something, you had this computer assistant that was going to help you. And it got made fun of and eventually was shut down because it was terrible to use, as everyone who experienced Clippy knows. It was annoying and broke your concentration and wasn't useful at all. But the idea of it was interesting. So we'll move on. So if we know that AI and robots are probably superior to doing a lot of tasks that humans, are doing for money, then where is the real human advantage? And so the real human advantage that we have is with feelings, emotions, and enjoyment. We're really, really good at feeling emotions about stuff. And a lot of the talk today, a lot of the, we talked about storytelling in the morning, a lot of the pain points that happen, and a lot of the biggest laughs, and a lot of the oohs, came when it's a nice emotional thing. So we're really good at just naturally having.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we we'll talk. It's like, okay, now we're going to talk. We're going to get to the part of the talk where we talk about emotions and feelings and engagement, as though that's like the artsy part of the talk. But it's, humans think and they feel, and they actually do the two at the same time, and you can't pull them apart. I mean, we are humans, and our natures are to be emotional and have relationships and enjoy things. We are not robots. We are not machines. We are not Mr. Spock. He's talking again. Oh, yes, thank you. This wasn't in this talk. It's in another talk, but he says, tell him about when. So there's a certain part of your brain where if it is damaged through accident or injury, and you don't have feelings and emotions anymore, you also can't make any decisions. Like you can't decide anything. Like, do you want to use a pen or a pencil to write that down? You can't make big life decisions, can't make any decisions. If you can't feel, you can't decide. And so it's not an either or. It's not, I'm going to think sometimes and sometimes I'm going to feel. No, that's not the way humans are. So if we think about, Guthrie, I think in some ways it's funny because in some ways you're more optimistic than I am, because I put in the slide that says, AI is going to do everything, including information jobs. And then my follow-up sentence is, your jobs will all be gone. And his follow-up sentences is, well, maybe not. Not if the economics, because, he has an economics degree. If the economics don't work, then they won't take your job. However, the thing, at least for now, at least for a while, at least 10 years, maybe more, that machines won't do as well as us, is anything that has to do with emotions and feelings. This is really important. So I think it's really important that we think about what kind of relationships do we want to have with machines? What's the role of the machine, and what's the role of the human moving forward, and who gets to make those decisions? And I also think that it's really important that you guys, that we as designers, whether you're a UX person or a designer, or product manager, or product designer, visual designer, with the kind of people that are in the room at a conference like this, that you and we start to prepare for this future when, all programming and code, or most programming and code, will be done by machine, not by human. I personally believe all UX, a lot of UX and design work will be done by machine and by AI and not by humans. So does that mean there's nothing for us to do? No, absolutely not. Think about, when you're doing design, think about the part of the work that you do that has to do with understanding and building in how people feel. Do they feel safe? Do they feel excited? Right? That's really a lot of what we do, but we don't always look at it that way. Or if we do, we think that's like a secondary thing. That's not a secondary thing. That's going to become the stuff that we do, because it's the stuff that the machines won't be able to do for at least a couple more decades. So you want to start thinking about things like social robots and AI and so on, and ask, how might this be implemented in the kind of industry, the product and service that I'm in, and what are the things that I can do to help me improve the skills that are not going to disappear. And when there have been a gazillion great talks, but I keep thinking of the first one with Mark today, like storytelling, right? Or like the talk about city planning, about involving people, about looking at a design, in their case, crossing the road, but it can be anything you're designing, and asking, what would make people feel safe here? What would make people feel X or Y? Learning how to do really good interviews, really good observations, really good sketching, really good, Dave Gray type game storming and collaboration in your meetings, because that's the human part that is not going to be easily replaced. I'm going to bet, looking at it, guessing the ages of people in the room, if you had these skills, you should be able to make it to the end of your career in retirement, even if the AI starts doing all the designing of screens and pages and voice interactions. All right, Guthrie.
So
number 3. This is our last one.
We'll go through this fast. So one of the reasons I think it feels like things are happening very fast in this field is because we're really good at the present, but kind of we're really bad. We as a society, as corporations, we're really bad at regulating sort of the future tech. And we talked today. I mean, ethics is very hot. I remember a bunch of years. You've been doing conferences for a long time, and ethics was not.
We would propose to talk about ethics, and conference people would go, oh, it isn't.
And now
everybody's talking about ethics.
And it's very, very important. So very briefly, in my personal head, there are 3 ways that you can have oversight over technology. You have government oversight, so that's sort of the hammer, as it were. There are market forces, and there is which is more organizational regulation. So very briefly, it does not appear that global governments are ready to handle implications of AI and automation, especially not here in the United States. Governments seem to be very good at springing into action when something goes wrong, but nothing has really gone wrong yet, and so there is no impetus to actually think critically and get ahead of these technologies. Market forces, that's a maybe for me. So far, it hasn't seemed like consumers have cared a whole lot about the ethics of the companies that they do. There's certainly some lip service to that, a little bit, but people, as long as it's cheap and convenient, people seem to be willing to not care about privacy policies, buying, phones that are sourced with, who knows what, et cetera. But that's perhaps changing. There does seem to be quite a bit more consumer backlash to some of these technology products, but that one's also maybe. And, that leaves internal self-regulation. You guys all work, in companies or organizations, and you are a part of this process. And we're starting to see, especially Facebook, I believe it was Google that was working with the government to develop, I think it was AI software for the military, and a bunch of Google employees. Memos are going out, we don't want to be in this business. And so there are sort of internal pushes in a lot of different stuff. HR, being able to have HR actually regulate their employees, or ethical workplaces as well. So there does also seem to be some self-regulation. But that's where all of you come in. So there's a lot at stake for the future interaction design to be happening. And it seems like the UX designers, the human factors people, the people in this room, people are interested in this topic, even if you're not a UX professional, but you are interested in UX adjacent stuff. I wish it wasn't the case, but it seems like the burden of all of the ethics decisions are going to be basically up to you guys. Unless there seems to be a lot of market forces that really change that, I'm not sure I see a whole lot else stopping it. Who here has seen a TV ad recently that had a jump scare in it? Where the person was doing something and then something scary happened in the ad? Like the deer jumps in front of the car, or, oh, it was just a bad dream and now I woke up. Marketing companies are smart. They've read all the same research we have. They know that it's actually all about just getting your attention. And so they figured out that if they have jump scares in an ad, you will pay attention to them and retain their product better. Someone said race to the bottom of the brainstem. And that's, so it's not my line, I stole that one. But it is that, there doesn't seem to be any stop to that. Notifications on phones, like there is a commodification of your attention. And again, the only thing that seems to be able to halt that progress is the people inside organizations who are pushing to perhaps make less money in order to have a more sort of ethical practice. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I guess I would. We're gonna take questions in about 30 seconds. So think about questions that you want to ask. But I guess I would. I was sitting here right before we came on. I was sitting and thinking and listening from all the talks today, and I felt like what I turned to Guthrie and I said, it's not that the technology makes us bad actors. I don't believe that. I believe we are who we are. We're humans, and we will use whatever is available, and we always have, to do good stuff and stuff that's good for us, stuff that's good for the world, and weird stuff, and stuff that makes some people get ahead and other people not get ahead. I mean, this is our human nature. I guess in some ways I'm an optimist, some ways I'm a pessimist, in that I know too much about psychology and people, and that kind of change is really long term because it's evolutionary. So I don't think personally that we should blame technology or stop technology, but back to the help wanted, we do need to stay on top of it, and we need to always be looking at what is it that we know about people, and what should we do, and you guys, again, I'm going to say this is the group that's ready because you know about technology and you know about people, and help me, help us make sure that the technology that is built moving forward, there's always someone looking at it and saying, okay, but what about the human point of view? So thank you guys very much. And we have some time and we really want some questions.
Yeah,
So.
really good. And we have also, contact information.
Yeah, questions, comments? Yes?
I guess doing all this, notice there's a pattern of innovation and then ethics backlash.
What would you say before the backlash?
Innovation.
Oh, she asked, is there always an innovation and then an ethics backlash? Sometimes there is. Sometimes the ethics backlash is so quiet that it's not really a backlash. It's like a few people going, hey, wait. It is true that what we always do is we get the capability and the technology, whatever it is, and we go, wow, let's do this. And then a couple years later, there's, oh wait, this doesn't work for the humans. I mean, I've been in this field for a really long time, and so every new thing that comes up, it's like, okay, let's just wait about 6 months, and then we'll get a phone call for someone to come and they want us to help them make this usable or work for the humans. So I think there's always that lag because we get excited about the technology. Do you think there's always a ethics backlash?
So it's nuanced. I think it's yes, but oftentimes it's like when something new happens, the old way of doing things had a special place, and it dies, and it's sad, and so now we have the new way of doing things, and it's different. So when you were growing up and you needed to meet your friends, you know.
We had this conversation, we were driving, we were actually right about in St. Louis when we had this conversation. We were driving from Chicago down to Houston. And, you know, have you ever done that long drive? There's not much on the radio or anything. And we didn't have satellite radio. I don't even know if we had iPhones plugged in or anything. And he looked at me, he said, hey, when you were like a teenager, how did you ever get together with your friends? Like you couldn't just text them and say, meet me at such and such. And I had to think about it. And then I said, well, you could try calling someone at their house. And he said, well, what if they weren't there? I said, you just had like 2 or 3 places that you tended to go. So you just go and see who showed up.
So, yeah, now that we have technology, that's sort of like we're going to go to the spot. We're all going to hang out at the place. There's like this shared culture because this is where we are. That sort of goes away. And that's sad, but then we have the new way that's better. And so a lot of the... right? Well, you know, and
I don't think he thinks it's better, but okay.
I'll say better. I'm an economist.
He didn't even know while you were laughing.
It's better because everyone's doing it. See, I'm not taking.
It's more efficient.
Economist.
Is he a millennial?
Market forces.
Yeah. All right, another question. Yes.
How do you alter the course of a digital product that's the cat's out of the bag? The market forces and human nature just go full steam ahead.
Yeah.
No time to evaluate whether that's actually good for us or not. So thinking about Facebook or something. As a psychologist, I'm curious to hear your thoughts, but also how do you alter and shape our perception of that? And how do we change the course of things that we see are problematic, knowing that it creates anxiety and depression in certain populations?
Yeah, so the question is how do you if there's a technology and you see it, it's coming and it's happening, what can you do to alter that if it looks like it might have a negative impact, on people, it might cause anxiety, depression, or whatever.
If you're Mark Zuckerberg, who just tells people to change it, but
I think
we're not CEO.
I guess I would have 2 possible answers to that. One is that you start, this is why we go places and talk about people. You start to try and get into people's brains and into corporations' brains that there is this whole human nature side, and it's something that you should think about earlier rather than later. That's what I would say. That's my hopeful thing, and it doesn't usually work that way, but I'm not going to stop doing it. But the other thing is so that's the optimist. The optimist says you just keep talking about people and talking about people and talking about people, and you'll reach a few people, and it'll eventually, help a little. And then the pessimist part of me says you get ready. You just you watch what they're doing, and you go, okay, they're going to do this, and it's going to, and eventually it's going to implode to the point where they get in trouble legally, or it becomes a big hassle, or a big PR disaster, or they do start losing money, and eventually they'll go, okay, I guess we got to change this, or we got to worry about this, and so, but during that time period where they're oblivious, I'm getting ready. I'm like preparing for the phone call, and then I can come in and help them because I'll know what to do because I'm getting ready because I know it's coming. I guess that's what I would say. On the other hand, I would say in terms of anxiety and depression, I know there's some research about that, but I'm famous for running around screaming at the top of my lungs. Correlation does not imply causation. So I don't know. Every time I see, people are more people who are on social media X number of hours a week are more depressed or anxious than people who aren't, and I'm like, okay, but maybe the more depressed, anxious people are on social media more. It's correlation, not necessarily causation. Yes.
Ethics and design is really important to me.
Yes.
And I also recognize that I'm like creative technologist would say, and there are tools coming out like, now we can start using machine learning for ironies, or now we can start submitting lots of information using all these services popping up. You don't always know what those limitations are. So I'm curious about like what is the litmus test, or what are the indicators that product teams can start thinking about, start collecting data about it because of the future of harm. I just don't know where to look.
Yeah. So her question, you can answer, but let me say what the question was. She's so she's very interested in this whole idea about ethics and design. Are there things that teams can think about beforehand? Is there a litmus test? How do you define and prepare for the idea that your product or service might cause harm? How do you forecast that and prepare for it?
Do you have the model in here in the slides?
I don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
So one of the things that she likes to give me tasks to do is to come up with formulas for stuff. And so
He's an economist. He loves formulas.
Figure out a way to calculate. So like we have this behavioral design model where it's a whole, it's a process with steps and stuff to calculate what is good behavioral design. And so much the same way, I came up with a calculation. I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's just an idea of thinking about it, of calculating how ethical a product is. And so it's two factors. First factor is you look at the population at the extremes, and you figure out, okay, how much harm is the product doing to the the 5th percentile and the 95th percentile, right at the edges. So the best example of that would be mobile, gaming apps with microtransactions. For the majority of people, they play, they have fun, it's no big deal. But there is right at the edges, 1 or 2%, they're getting horribly addicted and they're spending $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $8,000 or whatever it is. Now, I'm making the assumption that the apps don't know that and are preying on that. So let's just assume that you're in a company that doesn't want to prey on that edge. So that's the first factor, is what's happening at the extremes, because that's very important. And then the second factor is what's happening in the middle. So for the vast majority of users, are we actually, are we causing sort of more good than harm? What are some of the risks? Is it a medium-sized risk of a medium-sized bad thing happening? Or, for example, if it's medical data, and your medical data gets out, is it a very small risk of something really bad happening? And your identity gets stolen. So by sort of figuring out what are the risks of the edges, and the second factor being what are the risks for the general population, you can sort of get a ballpark idea of how sort of ethical your implementation of something is.
I believe he actually has a formula for this. So
try to describe it.
Okay. All right.
So hopefully that's useful. But just so you can sort of think about ethics as a number, and I think especially in terms of organizations, especially if they're engineering focused, a lot of A/B testing, that also may be useful.
A number would be great. So instead of saying, I think there might be some harm here, you can say, well, if you design it this way, the harm is going to be 0.275, and if you design it this way, the harm is going to be 0.757. And then it becomes like a real number that the numbers people and the engineering people can actually deal with. All right, before we're done, I just have a couple more things. I want to mention we have a podcast that we do together called Human Tech, if you're interested in podcasts.
So on whatever podcast.
And Danielle Cooley, Danielle just was one of our guests on recently. So you might want to check that out.
We have a bunch of free courses.
We have a bunch of courses. Someone won one of our course of their choice, but we also have some free courses. If you want to check out our free ones, you can find them under free. And then we have a bunch of books, and someone won a new book. Guthrie's new book is called I Love You, Now Read This Book. It's all about human decision making and behavioral economics.
It's really long. I'm sorry.
It's a big, long, fun book. It does have a lot of cute little pictures.
So I believe we're out of time.
Yes.
We're right out of time.
Yeah, good.
Okay. Well, we'll be around.
We'll be around afterwards. Thank you guys very much.
So yeah, they'll be around. We're going to have a little bit of networking. So starting right now, going till 6. Have an absolute stop at 6. So start packing your bags 5 or 10 minutes before, please. Love you all, but we're